Like if you're under stress and getting less than 6 hours of sleep a night because you're in a heavy stress state on trial, like that's actually when alcohol should be cut from your life.
Blasphemy. What are you doing, Juliet?
Yeah, I know this is the lawyers are going to die. But you've got to, I think that's the time when you have to be like, okay, I maybe won't be able to exercise. I won't really be able to breathe hard. The best I'm going to do is get a little bit of walking in and eat some fruits and vegetables and protein, and maybe stand at my desk a little bit. But not sleeping is going to be a stressor on your body, and adding alcohol into that mix is an additional stressor.
Howdy, and welcome to the show. Cooper's Code focuses on legal issues and notable individuals, distilling wisdom so we all achieve the best results for our clients. I'm Miles Cooper, and I'm honored to share this conversation with Kelly and Juliet Starrett. The Starretts are at the top of their game, and that game is helping people across the board gain and maintain mobility. With Zoom lawyering more and more prevalent, this conversation is aimed at helping the deskbound take care of themselves. The Starretts, through their company, The Ready State, work with the NBA, NFL, NHL, MLB, and the U.S. Olympic team, as well as Tier 1 elite military units. The methods equally apply to desk jockeys, children, and anyone dealing with injuries and chronic pain. Their teaching is available through the New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling books, the Ready State podcast, their mobility app, and if you're in the Bay Area, their San Rafael-based studio. Juliet came to this through world champion level whitewater paddling with an 8-year stint as a complex commercial litigator at Richness, before working with Kelly to build the incredibly successful San Francisco CrossFit. Kelly's background is a passion for movement and improvement, honed through a doctor of physical therapy and decades of working with the best of the best to help them reach their outer limits. So please sit back with regular mobility breaks and enjoy the insights the Starretts have for us. Welcome to the show, Juliet and Kelly.
Thanks for having us, Miles.
Always nice to be here.
As we get into things, just so people get a little bit of a flavor as to who you are and why I've asked you to be on a lawyer's podcast. Juliet, maybe I can start with you. Can you just tell us a little bit about your background in terms of how you ended up where you are now with a little 8-year detour being a top flight litigator?
Lawyer turned personal trainer.
Turned personal trainer, yeah. Yeah, I mean, where do I begin?
You could start with rowing.
Yeah, well, I was a Division I rower at UC Berkeley and also in high school, and I have been an athlete my entire life. And then I went on after college to spend 5 years being a national team athlete in a really weird fringe sport called extreme whitewater paddling. That actually is a huge sport in other countries and less well known here in the United States. But, as a young 20-something, I saw it as an opportunity to be paid for to travel around the world and see awesome places and, be a vagabond of sorts. And it obviously worked out because at the 2000 World Championships, that's where I met my now husband, Kelly. Greatest partnership ever. So I did that for a while, but I actually had always been planning to go to law school when I was a student at Berkeley. But because I can
attest this. When I met you on the beach of the river,
I was like, I'm going to law school.
You were like, I applied to law school.
And I will say I chose going to law school for probably a very similar reason that many other lawyers choose. And that is that I liked school. I was good at school. Maybe wasn't very creative in my thinking in terms of what I want to do. But, and I actually did have at that time sort of potentially an interest in politics. So those things combined. And after being a professional athlete and being stone cold broke for about 5 years after college, I was like, all right, okay, this detour into professional athlete life has been fun. And I'm going to get serious now. And I want to have a real job and actually, not have to survive on credit card debt when my car breaks down. So I went to law school, and that turned into almost, I think, closer to 7.5-year career at Reed Smith, where I did a variety of things, but I was mostly a drug and medical device litigator. But I was very lucky early on to work with someone who put me on some smaller cases that were sort of legacy cases from when Reed Smith had been a smaller firm called Crosby, Heafy, Roach and May. So I actually got to do like real lawyer things early in my career that a lot of young lawyers, at least at that time, weren't doing. Most of the lawyers at big firms back then were just doing like endless document review and a bunch of other horrible things. And I really lucked out to be able to take on some small cases and do a lot of depositions and actually appear in court. And so, I actually had fun. But at the same time, overlapping, Kelly and I fell in love with and founded a CrossFit gym called San Francisco CrossFit. And we just had it as a side hustle, not planning on it being a business of any kind. We had just fallen in love with sort of the method of CrossFit. And I think it really spoke to us as former professional athletes because we had what we called this like dark period from when we retired as being athletes. To when we found and fell in love with CrossFit, where we were just like sad and going to the gym and stairmastering and not really sure sort of how to like be physical as professional people. And we found and fell in love with CrossFit, and there weren't any. So we decided to open CrossFit mostly as a place to train with our friends. And so we ended up being the 21st CrossFit in the world. We started it, for those who are listening, in San Francisco, in the Presidio, outdoors, in a parking lot behind the sports basement on Crissy Field.
20 years ago.
And obviously, it was an unconventional business model. And again, we did not start that to be a business at all. I mean, I was working at Reed Smith. Kelly was just graduating from physical therapy school and about to take on a real job. And we felt like it was a fun thing to do. Fast forward to today, we've since started another business called The Ready State. And we've written some books about how to take care of your body. Most recently, we wrote a book called Built to Move, which I think is going to be the most relevant for this lawyer community, because I think for many years, because we were professional athletes, we worked with a lot of professional teams and organizations. What we really cared about was, how do we make the best in the world just a little bit better? But once we became parents, moved to the suburbs, started working with more and more people at our commercial gym.
Old.
We ourselves got old. We started trying to figure out how we could sort of translate the lessons that we've learned working in those high performance environments to sort of everyday people. And that's how our most recent book, Built to Move, was born. And so that's where we are today.
Well, and Kelly, I'm going to ask you the kind of the same, how did I get here? But following on what you just mentioned, I think you also are doing a new program. I don't know if it's been released yet, but a strength and conditioning program specifically for people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, kind of the dumpy lawyers like me who need something.
Yeah, well, we've noticed lately we've been lucky enough in part because of this book and because of all the years we've been in the space to have sort of been inserted into sort of the longevity community, I would say, these days. And one of the things we see now is that there's this giant gap between information and implementation. We all have so much access to podcasts and information and social media.
But listening to podcasts is not a health practice.
Right. But we have a lot of friends whose entire health practice is listening to the Huberman Lab podcast, and that's cool and that's great. And we're fans and there's so much awesome information out there, but there's still this weird gap between all the things, all of the massive amount of sort of health, wellness, longevity information everybody's consuming and actually being able to implement it in their lives. And so we're trying to create a program. We're launching it this January called the Starretts system. And the goal of it is to say, okay, we've been in the space forever. We've had access to all the tools and tricks, and we're going to curate for you what we think are the most important things. You curate and program for you what we think are the most important things you need to be doing, with an eye towards this program being for people like you who, are not fitness influencers. You're just people who want to feel good in your body now, and you want to be as healthy as you can as your age and sort of be ready to take the hits that are coming. So that's been our latest focus, is creating this Starretts system program. Thanks for asking. Yeah,
no, that sounds really neat. So flipping over to you, Kelly, can you tell us a little bit about kind of your path, your progression, and how you have found yourself similarly to Juliet doing what you're doing now?
Well, I think there's an old noir book sort of term called Sachez la femme, follow the girl. And so you have to understand that, Juliet and I, in our partnership, we've always loved to play together and adventure together. And wherever we've been in our livelihoods, from attorneys to gym owners to physios, we've never lost track of the fact that ultimately we want to feel better in our bodies. And we want to go adventure and use our bodies in pain-free ways, whatever that it's important to us. And so I became a physio. after being on a different kinds of national team and the national team that Juliet was with. And as we start coaching at the gym, we're starting to recognize that we're developing a model to understand complex human movement behavior. And that was where our first book came out in, I think, 2013, called Becoming a Supple Leopard. And you may actually have seen that book. It's probably underneath someone's computer right now.
It's a great standing desk.
Yeah, it's an exercise tomb. It's really a textbook. But what we found was that we were able to overturn some sacred cows about who owns pain, who owns position. And what's really a dangerous idea in that book is that we were able to move a lot of information outside a paywall or from out behind the curtain of the musculoskeletal sort of industrial complex. That if you had pain, you as a person are not complicated or complex or sophisticated enough to take a crack at that knee pain, even though you just went for a run. And you're going to need to do is activate the emergency medical system. You're going to see a physician, and you're going to go talk to a physical therapist.
Get an MRI.
And that has nothing to do with why you may or may not need those things. It turns out that was your only solution. What we saw was that when we started asking everyone that we were working with, do you have pain? The answer was yes, about 98% of the time. People are like, yes, something hurts. And I think if anyone listening to this, if you take stock and you say, how's your body feel? They're going to say, well, I have a thing that hurts. And so what we found was that pain was very much a feature of the human condition, and certainly a feature of people using their bodies, and sometimes definitely for people who didn't use their bodies.
I'm thinking about some of the people who listen to this, and a lot of the people, not that different than Juliet, a lot of people who become lawyers are driven people. Oh yeah. And they're driven in ways where they like what some people refer to as type 2 fun. They're okay being in pain. They like being in pain.
That's right.
Whether it's rowing or whether it's studying or whether it's being at the desk too long.
I don't know if they're like being in pain, but they're comfortable saying that this is discomfort. I'm going to sit here and I have this deadline and I'm going to be able to delay gratification.
For the bar is the largest sufferfest you can do on earth, right? If you're ready to suffer, just take the California bar exam.
And what we recognize is that we hadn't really come up with a set of tools or guidelines, especially things that were so easy to help people or return agency or loci control back to people.
Can I tell a story real quick?
Yeah, but hang on. What we said was, it's a medical problem. And people were like, well, that's not a medical problem that I have time for or need to. I don't think it's that bad. There's not a bone sticking out of my leg. I don't have a fever. So I'll just take this ibuprofen and this bourbon. And that's really what we did until it got so bad we activated the medical emergency system. If your back hurts and you have to call an ambulance to take you to the hospital because you can't go do your lawyer job, that's a medical emergency. True fact. But there are about 100 steps before that moment and, something that you can do to keep an eye on how your body works. And that's the short story. And I'll let Juliet tell her question or story. But what we really started to realize is that we could have a set of practices and behaviors that were sort of parallel to strength and conditioning, which was a formal movement system and a diagnostic tool. And in that language of improving people's pain and position and function, we were winning a lot of world championships. We were winning a lot of gold medals. We were seeing that we were able to improve small organizations like the Army or the Navy or the FBI or the CIA or Fortune 500 companies because everyone had a shoulder and everyone had a back. And because we were working in high performance, we could see inputs and outputs that mattered under stress, under load, under speed, where people required their bodies to do these high level things. We were able to see sort of what was more salient and more important.
So we used to play this game called Armchair PT. And we had in our gym for many years, we had an in-house physical therapy clinic where Kelly would see clients. And it was
little staff.
We had a staff and, people, it was a cash-based physical therapy clinic, meaning we didn't take insurance. So people who were coming to see us were, taking a couple hours off of their work and paying,
highly motivated,
a couple $100s to come, take time off of work, come see Kelly for their various problems. And what we started to see over and over again. And so Kelly would come home at night and say, okay, so I saw this guy, Miles, he came in today and, he presented with X, Y, and Z, like press play on Armchair PT, which was me. What do you think's wrong with him? And 9 times out of 10, the things that were wrong with said patient were things that were super simple for them to correct, oftentimes on their own living room floor. If they just had a few simple tools, I'd be like, oh, okay, well, Miles has come in with X, Y, and Z problem and pain, and turns out it's tight hamstrings, or his quads are really stiff, or
missing hip extension.
He's missing hip extension, or he has his head is forward, his neck is forward on his head, and so his he has neck pain and shoulder pain. I mean, it was a lot of really simple things that, like, I as an attorney, with a few simple pieces of information from Kelly over and over and over again, because we started seeing the same people over and over again, we could sort of diagnose, 90% of the people that came in had like 5 problems. And so we realized that, we're like, hey, how can we democratize what Kelly's doing? And we started making YouTube videos. Before anyone really even knew what YouTube was, we just started making free YouTube videos.
The iPhone did not have a video camera.
Yeah, and it was, they're all still on there. And people, if they want to go down memory lane and watch some really poor quality videos with poor audio, but we didn't tell anyone we were putting YouTube videos up. We didn't market it in any way. We just started, filming these low quality videos, like in our garage, in our backyard. Just trying to share information and give people some simple tools to understand how their movement might affect, their ability to play sports or their pain, and how there was some simple tools that they could, like we could give them a little toolkit where they could work on their bodies on their own. And it just took off. I mean, people just found the videos, and, that was kind of the end of the story from there.
I just want to double click on something Juliet said, though, is E.O. Wilson, evolution psychologist, evolution biologist, said that the highest calling of science was to serve the humanities. And pure science is important, of course. We are totally about spaceships. You need a spaceship. You got to have pure science. But ultimately, we're interested in sport as not just circus and not just the playground of the elite, but as a living laboratory where we could see inputs and outputs. And I kind of hinted that before, so that we could take those lessons and transform our households and our families. And we think that's the highest calling of sport. And ultimately, as Juliet's saying, when we saw people who were injured or in pain or couldn't access positions, when we improved their positions and shapes, we restored their ability to move more freely with less pain. But we also saw changes in biomotor output, which means they ran faster. They lifted more. They could take a bigger breath. Their pelvic floor worked better. They could turn their heads further. And I think that's the key here, is that we want to put position and being able to take care of your body as part of the strength conditioning training physical practice experience. And so you ask, well, what are the essentials for being a human being? Well, you're going to have to sleep, and you're going to have good relationships. You're going to need to walk and do all the things we talked about in this last book. But really, those are the things that make a complete practice. Whether that looks like fitness, or fitness is entertainment, or strength conditioning is up to you entirely. But there are essential things and inputs that the human being requires over 2.5 million years of evolution that were pretty non-negotiable. And you can shave those down and pretend like they don't matter to you for a while, but they always end up mattering.
If you're enjoying what we're doing here with Cooper's Code, please help us extend our reach by giving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and consider sharing an episode with a friend. Additionally, we want to know who you want to hear on the show. Have an interview suggestion? Email us at podcast@coopers.law. I'm directing a little bit at you, Juliet, as a way to tee off, because you have that experience of being a litigator at a firm where results matter. And so if you're a lawyer and you have kids and you're facing trial, people oftentimes are willing to mortgage everything, like, work till midnight, 1 a.m, not get up from the desk, repetitive stress injuries. What would you say to the person who is in that mode right now, as far as how to incorporate some of these things in their life to make their longevity, both as a human and as a lawyer, better?
I think actually one of the things that I can do as a person to best inform this whole health and wellness conversation is that, or one of the ways that my perspective is helpful, is that I have had that job. What I see is a lot of people in the health and fitness and wellness space have always had very flexible jobs, and often haven't had the kind of job where they've had to have those kind of days. They've had it's not, they've often been in jobs that don't quite require what I call a lot of work pain tolerance. And so I think sometimes they get frustrated thinking like, I don't understand why people just can't do these basic things, and I'm like, okay, but work.
You didn't have time to get lunch today.
Yeah, like work a billable hour job where you have a trial coming up, or a TRO gets filed on Friday night at 6 p.m. and you have to cancel your plans and work for the whole weekend, and maybe you had to cancel your mountain bike ride. Like that's there. There's not a lot of people who in my space who've ever had a job like that, and so I think that perspective has really helped me appreciate how I can try to help people in this exact position figure out ways to add health behaviors into their lives sustainably, and also think about these sort of seasons. And I would describe like being in trial as a season of, you're not always going to be in trial, and you're not always going to have these like high output times. There's obviously this sort of different cadence when you're practicing law. And I think part of it is about, giving yourself a little bit of grace when you're in those high stress times.
But still controlling what you can control.
But controlling what you can control. If you're working a 12-hour day, and it may just be that, you can focus on your nutrition and, make sure that when you go out for 10 minutes to get food, what that is involves fruits and vegetables and a little bit of protein. Maybe the best you can do from a fitness perspective is try to take 5 20-minute walks a day or 5 10-minute walks a day. Maybe do a little bit of standing at your desk versus sitting the whole day. Because it's so annoying. Some health influencer is going to say to someone, well, you got to prioritize your sleep. And you're like, dude, I'm in trial. I cannot, sleep is out the door. Like, we get that, right? But, these times would be when I would say like, alcohol's out. Like if you're under stress and getting less than 6 hours of sleep a night because you're in a heavy stress state on trial, like that's actually when alcohol should be cut from your life.
Blasphemy. What are you doing, Juliet?
Yeah, I know this is the lawyers are going to die. But you've got to, I think that's the time when you have to be like, okay, I maybe won't be able to exercise. I won't really be able to breathe hard. The best I'm going to do is get a little bit of walking in and eat some fruits and vegetables and protein, and maybe stand at my desk a little bit. But not sleeping is going to be a stressor on your body, and adding alcohol into that mix is an additional stressor.
And what I think one of the things that Juliet's sort of framing for you is something we call this 24-hour cycle. And if we look at that, every day is basically a game. We're going to play this infinite 24-hour game. And the goal is there are some things that my body needs. I need to drink some water. Everyone agree, right? I need to sleep. Everyone agree. I need to move my tissues. So what are some minimums that we can begin to establish on that? Number one, so that when you come out of trial, then you realize, okay, I need to get my sleep back, and I need to start walking more, and I need to get some sunshine. But in that trial time, or those peak stress times, and again, insert having a baby, going through divorce, like choose the pain. Mm-hmm. And what you'll see is ultimately we're going to ask, where do you have some agency and control? And what Juliet beautifully pointed out is that there's actually a lot more control during the workday than you think. You could create a lot more movement richness. You could, again, just move your body enough. You can control some nutrition. You could, right? But in the morning before you leave, and in the evening when you get home, those might be the only windows of the day where you've got 10 minutes before, after the alarm goes off and before you need to make your kids breakfast, and when you get home and the kids have gone to bed. Those are the two corners where we could expand the definition of physical practice to say, hey, let's sit on the floor. Let's ask what's tight. Let's do a little mobilizing. Right? Let's get a breath practice, something like that for 10 minutes. And what we start to see is over time, these small 10-minute increments, these small walks, these small little micro habits, whatever you want to call them, actually make a pretty compelling case for health and fitness. We have told everyone that fitness only happens in 1 hour chunks and it has to be high intensity. And that's a lie. That's not the case. What we want everyone to do is start to begin to think my health and physical practice should be exercise agnostic. And when I have time to breathe hard and lift a weight, and everyone knows they need to do that, then we'll do it. But when I can't do that, I'm not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater.
The other one thing I would add is that we love this phrase that we learned from our friend Dave Spitz, who owns a great gym in the East Bay called Cal Strength. And even though he owns a gym, he had 3 little kids, and he woke up one day and he's like, wow, I don't recognize myself. Like, I'm completely out of shape and I haven't been exercising. And he developed this mantra called never do nothing. which I love as a busy person, because I do think we have all gotten stuck in what Kelly said is this mentality that like, well, if I don't have an hour, I'm not going to do anything because I lost my chance. And, when our kids were little and I was still practicing law and, Kelly was a PT and we were running our business on the side, we developed this workout called the 10-10-10 at 10.
Elite fitness.
And it was like 10 air squats, 10 push-ups, 10, sit-ups for 10 minutes, done at 10 p.m.
By 10 p.m. or done at 10 p.m.?
At 10 p.m. Because by that point, like our kids had gone to bed, we'd gone back online and answered the last few emails and done a little bit of work. And we were like on, but we had lost our chance to work out during the day. And we had this little window, and certainly the 10-10-10 at 10 was not going to send us to the Olympics or anything resembling the Olympics. But we felt like it was just this little way to like keep the iron hot for a time when we would have a little more time to, pay attention to our exercise, or for those days or weekends when we could. And
the other thing is, believe it or not, there are attorneys who don't like to exercise. Not everyone likes to exercise.
Right.
And what we want to do is, everyone's got the message, but what we want to do is, again, expand this definition of physical practice and begin to put in some guidelines, some vital signs, some benchmarks that help us understand where we are and what's essential. Blood pressure, 120/80. Everyone's like, yeah, it's decent blood pressure. It's not great. A little bit lower is probably better. A little bit higher, still not dangerous. But that gives us a clear mark for understanding where we are and what is typical of a human being. And we can do the same thing with steps and grams of fruits and vegetables and protein and sleep. And when we start to do that, when we have clear evidence-based objective measures, then that means that however you want to solve those problems are up to you. And again, still agnostic. We recently, in the last few years, we had 3 women in our lives that were over 100 years old, which is incredible. And someone in here has an auntie in their 90s who's like still doing shots of tequila and smoking cigarettes and eating little chocolate donuts. And that woman has never exercised or done a high intensity Pilates, yoga, flow, Tae Bo. She's never done that in her life, right? But still 100 years old and still kicking butt. So we need to ask, hey, we're designed to be 100. What's essential for the human being in terms of process? Of course, lifting weights and breathing hard is probably going to be important. But what we realize is it can't be the only metric of our health and our success of our health. Because if the definition of health and fitness is just taking off my shirt and feeling ripped, that is a terrible definition of success.
That is good to know, because I had actually planned on filming this particular podcast that way.
And I want to encourage you.
Yeah, shirtless. You're like, I am the exception.
Jacked and tan is the only way to live. Let me be honest.
You used a phrase a while back, and was it movement richness? Was that a phrase that you?
Yep.
And can you elaborate a little bit on what a lawyer or a paralegal might be able to do throughout the course of their day that would create opportunities for movement richness that might prevent them from having to show up in their 40s, 50s, or 60s to you with either intractable problems or far more significant problems?
Let me set this up for everyone. If we looked at all of the movements that your body was capable of, right? And here, just think about kindergartners on the playground, right? Running, cutting, arms overhead, jumping up off the ground, sliding on your stomach, pushing up.
Sitting on the ground.
Right? All of those things. We could actually make a language out of that. And every one of those skills and movements is a word. And what we tend to see for the typical adult is that they have 3 words. It's like, I eat iceberg lettuce, a pale tomato, and maybe a
baby carrot,
carrot. And that's all I eat, right? Like, come on. So that movement language, we want to keep diverse and large. And that might be as simple as, I need to have my knee behind my butt in something that looks like a lunge. I need to put my arms over my head, right? You can see that there are some essential positions to maintaining. If we want to talk about your neck pain and your back pain, we're going to have to talk about your shoulders and what you do or do not do with your shoulders as a system. But the typical movement language expressed by the average person is, I get up out of bed and I sit on the edge of the bed. I stand up. I walk around with very short steps at low speeds. And then I sit at a table. I sit at the car. I walk around. Maybe I go up and down some stairs. Mostly I'm not. I'm just in the elevator. And then I lay back down again. And you've expressed, honestly, 3 words. And your hands have stayed in front of your body the whole day to eat and to be on the computer. So you haven't reached behind you into the seat. Maybe you had to grab the seatbelt. Maybe that's a different language. But what we see is suddenly the brain doesn't have a lot of exposure to movements. The tissues aren't being loaded or expressed. And that sets up sort of the pruning of potential movement options and sort of potential movement solutions. Because if I'm going to go then say, hey, I'm ready to go snowboard or ski or go for a hike with my family, I haven't done anything to maintain my vocabulary so that I can continue to write sonnets and express this miraculous body. So that sets us up to thinking, what are the things I might do? Gymnastics rings in every lawyer's office for starters.
Okay. So here's what I would add to this is that we are all designed to be lazy. And Kelly and I are no exception. Of course, there are some people who have a slightly higher genetic drive to move than other people. And, we can talk about that. But the reality is, if the environment is set up for us to walk into our office and sit in our cozy chair for the entire day, that's what everybody's going to do. If you go home to your house and your cupboard is full of cookies, you are going to eat cookies. And so what we've tried to do both in our home and our office is to try to create what we call a movement-rich environment. And I'll tell you what that looks like at the office. So right now we're here at a standing height table. Just because we're on camera and our heads need to be the same height, Kelly's actually perching on his stool, which means he's sitting on the edge of the stool, but his feet are on the ground. I'm just standing here at this table. I'm going to be standing here for this entire podcast. And
you have a stool behind you. If you
I have
want
a
to sit
stool
down,
behind me if I want to perch or sit. But the goal is to be constantly changing positions all day. The worst case scenario is to be sitting in a single position for many hours in a row. And so there's lots of ways to make your environment more movement rich. I, for one, am a fan of getting a standing height table and unplugging it and leaving it at standing height. Because how many lawyers' offices have you been to where they've outfitted the entire office with standing desks, everybody pressed the button to down, and then it's never come back up again. They're just sitting there at their standing desk. Well, we need to take that option away from ourselves. Put it up at standing height, unplug it from the wall, and then get a stool. Because if you watch me throughout my day, I am not standing for 9 continuous hours. I will stand for 20 or 30 minutes, then I'll pull up my stool and I'll perch. If I'm lucky enough to be working at home, I will sit at my coffee table and sit on the floor for part of the day. I'm just constantly moving from position to position to position. But what I've done is set up my environment so it's easy to do that. If my whole environment is just a comfy chair and a sitting desk and no space to move around, then I'm setting myself up to just be sitting all day. The other thing we have around our house is like a bunch of little balance boards and tools. And there's like a pull-up bar in the door coming in from the garage where we all enter. And, we have a lot of toys around our house. Like we create these opportunities where you're just standing there and, you're like, hey, I'm going to throw this ball or throw this Frisbee. So we just literally try to pepper our environment with balance toys, balance tools. We try to
let me give you two things
rich.
You could do to work on balance. And you could actually put your foot up on either one of these things, like the Captain Morgan pose, which is going to help you stand longer, be comfortable. One is called a slack block. We don't have any financial relationship with this company, but it's a little mini balance beam that can fit in your house or in your office. You stand on one leg and no one even needs to know that point 2 could be done on that slack block while you're reviewing documents. The other thing we love is called a gib board, like gib board, 2 B's. And it's a little mini slack line on something that looks like a skateboard deck. And again, you could go underneath your desk, you could prop your foot on it. It encourages fidgeting. And then when you're standing there for a second, just take a break, ask a different challenge. Your brain is a problem-solving machine. Let's give it some problems to solve. And we could be increasing this movement richness and movement language while we're at work. And again, probably not going to have a whole lot of sonnets written while you're at work in terms of your movement language, but that's not the intention. The intention is to keep moving. Harvard defines sedentary behavior as falling below 1.5 metabolic equivalents. And everyone here on this podcast is old enough to remember what a MET is on the old Stairmaster. So you're like, METs, I don't know what a MET is, but I'm doing 17 METs. I'm killing it. Well, a MET is a unit of metric that tells us how much energy our bodies are using at rest or at work. like an erg or a watt. It's just an old sort of a metabolic one. But 1.5 metabolic equivalents is the definition of cutoff of sedentary behavior. So if as soon as I sit down in a chair, I'm at 1.5. As soon as I lay down, I'm at 1.5, below 1.5. Standing or perching, as I'm doing, or I'm having to use more musculature, immediately kicks me up above 1.5. And it's not about total time, or not about not being below 1.5, but it's about limiting that total time of sedentary behavior to 6 total aggregate hours a day. That's sitting at the table, watching Netflix, being in that board meeting. And what we start to see is that your predominant movement language of choice is sitting. And there's a whole field of sedentary biology and sedentary physiology. We're not shaming you. You can sit in the chair, but you can't be your only adaptation tool to drive this change. And when your blood sugar goes up, or you have decreased circulation, or your hips get stiff, remember, your body's adapting. It has your back, and your body is saying, well, this is our life now. Let's do the best we can here. And that goes against the very nature of 2.5 million years of biological evolution, which says human beings need to move more during the day.
And I would just add, because you mentioned the driven piece, so many lawyers I know work these insane schedules, but still on the side are like trying to train for a triathlon or trying to run a marathon, or right, like they're going to just like burn it at all ends, to be able to.
And
like,
you can
do
burn
cool
the candle
stuff.
in the middle.
But I think, from a performance side, I mean, the amount of high performing people like lawyers that we've had who also are training for some sort of athletic event, who come see us and they're like shocked. They're like, oh my God, I don't know how I tore my ACL, or I don't know how I, blew out my Achilles. Like, it just happened. Well, we can tell you it didn't just happen. Chances are, if you're spending 12 hours of your day with every one of your joints at 90-degree angles, and you've really, limited your movement language, as Kelly discussed, for months and years to just a few positions, then when you're standing up and asking your body to be springy and use a bunch of languages that it doesn't use very often, in the form of running or sprinting or whatever sort of physical activity you're doing, and then something breaks, that actually shouldn't be a surprise, right? That's just like what Kelly likes to call a normal accident. This is so common in high performers.
If we could use an analogy that I think people can relate to, one of the sports that's very popular right now is pickleball.
Yeah.
And
which we're huge fans of.
I think pickleball will save America. And you've heard it here first.
Except it's going to, given the number of lawsuits over noise violations. The most recent.
Not my problem. But you're absolutely right. It's good business for everyone, orthopedists and physicians and attorneys, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think is amazing is pickleball is so accessible. Equipment's cheap. We can reutilize all these old equipment places like old tennis courts, but people are getting injured at a high rate. And I'm going to just put in quotation marks injury. I'm not going to define that so much, but they're seeking help, or we really do see some catastrophic things happening in injury. I'm not just talking about being sore, but it ends up being a really nice diagnostic tool. Let me tell you about how ready your body was, prepared to cut, to add speed, to change directions dynamically, to load and decelerate. And it turns out your Peloton, where you really worship your cardiorespiratory fitness in this tiny range of motion, and your marathon sitting, turned out to be really poor preparation for actually using your body in a creative way. There are all these old maxims that come out of the Chinese movement traditions, the old Soviet Russian traditions. You're as old as your spine. When you stop jumping, you start dying. You're as old as your feet. And what we start to see is, wow, we really aren't preparing our bodies, loading, asking them to be spring, asking these systems to be dynamic in really cogent, sustainable ways for long periods of time. Then we go test that. And if you get injured playing pickleball, I mean, that's like dislocating your shoulder playing ping pong. For me as a high level physical therapist, I'm like, are you serious? You dislocated your shoulder? Like, what was happening in that ping pong game? But people are astounded because what we've told them is this cardiorespiratory fitness on the Peloton or the Stairmaster is all you need to do. And it's not anyone's fault. They've been told that, hey, I go to yoga. I don't get what the problem is. I did what you asked me to do. I have abs, but it just turns out we're not asking the body to load and be prepared. And I think when we start to see through that lens of, hey, pickleball, good or bad, we start to understand, wow, if I'm going to have 110 years in this body, it's going to require some different interventions so that I can maintain my movement choice, so that I can come home after my long day and go play with my spouse or my household.
Thank you for listening, and please join us next week as we continue this conversation. Please email us at podcast@coopers.law with questions, comments, feedback, and suggestions for who we should have on the show. Like what you heard? Share us with a colleague and leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. To all of you doing justice out there, happy hunting.